Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands with a dirty rag, the familiar smell of jet fuel filling her nostrils as she worked beneath the belly of the F-16 Fighting Falcon. The hangar buzzed with activity around her, mechanics shouting over the roar of engines being tested, tools clanging against metal surfaces. To everyone at Nellis Air Force Base, she was just another aircraft maintenance technician, someone who kept the jets running but never got to fly them. What they didn't know was that Sarah had secrets locked away in her past, secrets that could change everything if the right moment ever came. 12 years ago, she had been one of the most promising fighter pilot candidates the Air Force had ever seen. Her reflexes were lightning quick, her spatial awareness was off the charts, and she could handle a jet like she was born in the cockpit. But life had other plans. The accident happened during her final training mission at Top Gun school. Her instructor, Captain Reynolds, had pushed her hard that day, testing her limits in aerial combat maneuvers. Sarah was flying perfectly, executing every move with precision that left even the seasoned pilots watching in awe. But then something went wrong with her aircraft's hydraulic system. The stick became sluggish. The plane started to respond poorly, and within seconds she was in a flat spin at 15,000 feet. Most pilots would have ejected immediately. The textbook said to punch out when you lose control. But Sarah wasn't most pilots. She fought with that aircraft for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. She tried every trick she knew, every emergency procedure drilled into her head during months of training. Her hands moved across the controls like a pianist playing a complex symphony, adjusting throttle, working the rudder, fighting to regain control. She managed to pull out of the spin at just 800 feet above the ground. The landing was rough, but she brought the damaged F-16 down in one piece. When the rescue crews reached her, Sarah was sitting in the cockpit, hands shaking not from fear but from pure adrenaline. She had saved a $30 million aircraft and her own life through skill that most pilots could only dream of having. But the investigation that followed changed everything. The hydraulic failure was ruled as pilot error in the preliminary report. Someone higher up the chain of command decided that Sarah had been too aggressive in her maneuvers, that she had pushed the aircraft beyond its limits. The fact that she had saved both herself and the plane seemed to matter less than finding someone to blame for the expensive near disaster. Sarah knew the truth. She had been flying by the book, executing exactly what her instructor had ordered. But when she tried to defend herself, she found that Captain Reynolds had conveniently developed memory problems about the specifics of what he had told her to do. The politics of the situation became clear quickly. Someone needed to take the fall, and a young female pilot in training was an easy target. The review board was made up of older officers, most of whom had never seen a woman handle an aircraft the way Sarah could. Some of them seemed almost relieved to have a reason to wash her out of the program. Women in fighter jets were still controversial in some circles, and Sarah's exceptional abilities had made some people uncomfortable. She was too good, too confident, too willing to push boundaries that some thought should remain firmly in place. Rather than fight a battle she knew she couldn't win, Sarah made a choice that surprised everyone. She accepted the blame and voluntarily withdrew from pilot training. But instead of leaving the Air Force entirely, she requested a transfer to aircraft maintenance. If she couldn't fly the jets, she would learn everything there was to know about how they worked. The decision shocked her instructors and fellow trainees. Here was someone with natural flying ability that came along maybe once in a decade, and she was choosing to work with wrenches instead of stick and rudder. Some thought she was crazy, others thought she was giving up. But Sarah had a plan that none of them could see. Over the next 12 years, Sarah became one of the most knowledgeable aircraft mechanics in the entire Air Force. She worked on every type of fighter jet in the inventory, from the aging F-16s to the newer F-35 Lightning IIs. She learned every system, every component, every possible failure mode. She could diagnose problems that stumped other mechanics, and she could fix issues that seemed impossible to solve. But more importantly, she never stopped flying. Not officially, of course. During her off-duty hours, Sarah would go to small civilian airports and rent time in basic aircraft. She flew everything she could afford, from tiny Cessnas to aerobatic planes. She kept her skills sharp, her reflexes quick, and her knowledge of flight operations current. She read every manual, studied every new tactical development, and watched footage of air combat exercises whenever she could get access to them. Her fellow mechanics respected her knowledge and work ethic, but they had no idea about her background. Sarah had learned to keep quiet about her past. She found that people treated her differently when they knew she had once been destined for the cockpit. Some became defensive, others became overly helpful, and a few became resentful. It was easier to just be the quiet mechanic who knew her job better than anyone else. As the years passed, Sarah watched new classes of pilot trainees come and go. She saw some exceptional aviators earn their wings, and she saw others who barely met minimum standards get promoted ahead of more deserving candidates. The politics of military aviation hadn't changed much, but Sarah had learned to work within the system rather than fight against it. What she didn't know was that her reputation as a mechanic was starting to create its own kind of recognition. Senior officers began to notice that aircraft Sarah worked on had fewer malfunctions, better performance ratings, and longer service lives. Her maintenance logs were detailed and precise, and she had an uncanny ability to predict when systems were likely to fail before they actually did. This attention was about to change everything, though Sarah couldn't see it coming yet. The Air Force was facing new challenges, new threats that required the absolute best pilots they could find. And sometimes the best pilot for the job wasn't the one sitting in the ready room waiting for orders. Sometimes the best pilot was the one nobody expected, the one who had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. The stage was being set for Sarah's return to the sky, but first, circumstances would have to align in just the right way to give her the opportunity she had been waiting for all these years. The emergency alarm pierced through the normal sounds of the maintenance hangar at 3:47 hours on a Tuesday morning. Sarah looked up from the engine she was working on, her trained ear immediately recognizing this wasn't a drill. The base-wide alert system was broadcasting something about unidentified aircraft approaching restricted airspace, multiple bogies detected, and immediate scramble orders for all available fighters. Within minutes, the hangar transformed into controlled chaos. Pilots ran toward their aircraft while ground crews swarmed around the jets, performing last-minute checks and loading weapon systems. Sarah found herself caught up in the frenzy, helping to prepare aircraft for what looked like it might be the real thing, rather than just another training exercise. Major Thompson, the squadron commander, was shouting orders while trying to coordinate with air traffic control and higher command. Sarah could see the stress on his face as reports kept coming in. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Intelligence suggested these weren't just random aircraft straying into restricted airspace. The radar signatures and flight patterns indicated sophisticated military aircraft, possibly belonging to a hostile nation that had been increasing tensions in recent months. As Sarah watched the organized chaos around her, she began to notice problems. 3 of the primary fighters had mechanical issues that would keep them grounded for hours. One had a faulty radar system that Sarah had been working on. Another had hydraulic leaks that hadn't been properly addressed. And the third was showing engine temperature problems that could lead to catastrophic failure if ignored. The available pilots were gathering for briefing, but Sarah could see the math wasn't working out. The base had 12 F-22 Raptors assigned to the squadron, but only 8 were in flyable condition. Of the 8 qualified pilots on base, 2 were sick with flu, 1 was recovering from a minor injury, and another was dealing with a family emergency and wasn't mentally ready to fly combat missions. This left 5 pilots for 8 aircraft, and the mission parameters called for at least 8 fighters to handle the threat effectively. Sarah watched Major Thompson's face grow more tense as he realized the numbers didn't add up. They were going to have to either request additional support from other bases, which could take hours to arrive, or go up undermanned against an unknown number of enemy aircraft. The briefing room was tense as pilots studied the latest intelligence reports. The unidentified aircraft were maintaining formation and heading directly towards several critical military installations. Their electronic signatures suggested advanced stealth technology, which meant they weren't dealing with an ordinary adversary. These aircraft had capabilities that could match or exceed anything the United States had in its inventory. Sarah found herself lingering near the briefing room, ostensibly checking on some maintenance paperwork, but actually listening to the tactical discussion. Her years of studying combat aviation were paying off, as she understood the complexity of the situation better than many of the people in uniform around her. The enemy aircraft were using sophisticated tactics, approaching from multiple vectors in a coordinated attack that would be difficult to counter even with a full squadron. Captain Williams, one of the younger pilots, was expressing doubts about the mission. He had only recently been certified on the F-22 and had never flown in actual combat conditions. His nervousness was obvious to everyone in the room, and Sarah could see that Major Thompson was worried about sending an inexperienced pilot into what could be a life-or-death situation. The tension increased when new intelligence arrived, indicating that the unknown aircraft had increased speed and were now less than an hour away from reaching their apparent targets. There was no more time to wait for reinforcements from other bases. Whatever response they were going to mount had to happen within the next 30 minutes, or it would be too late to intercept the threat effectively. Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked quietly to Major Thompson's office and knocked on the door. When he looked up from the stack of paperwork and tactical reports covering his desk, she could see the weight of command responsibility in his eyes. He was about to send pilots into danger with insufficient backup, and everyone knew it. "Sir, I need to speak with you about something important," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady and professional. Major Thompson looked at her with tired eyes. "Martinez, unless it's about getting those grounded aircraft back in the air in the next 20 minutes, I don't have time for maintenance reports right now." "It's not about maintenance, sir. It's about pilot availability." Sarah took a breath and made the decision that would change everything. "I'm a qualified fighter pilot. I washed out of Top Gun training 12 years ago, but I've maintained my flight status through civilian programs. I know these aircraft better than anyone on this base, and I can fly combat missions if needed." The major stared at her for a long moment, clearly processing this unexpected information. "Martinez, you're a mechanic. I've never seen any records indicating pilot training in your file." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded set of papers she had carried with her every day for 12 years, hoping she would never need them but knowing she might someday have to prove who she really was. The documents showed her Top Gun training records, her flight certifications, and her voluntary withdrawal from pilot training. She also had current civilian pilot licenses and records showing she had maintained proficiency in high-performance aircraft. As Major Thompson reviewed the paperwork, Sarah could see his expression changing from skepticism to surprise to something approaching hope. The documents were legitimate, and her flight hours were impressive even by military standards. She had logged more time in high-performance aircraft over the past 12 years than some of the active-duty pilots under his command. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" the major asked, still studying her records. "Because I learned that sometimes it's better to let people see what you can do rather than tell them what you used to be," Sarah replied. "I've spent 12 years learning these aircraft from the inside out. I know every system, every limitation, every capability. I can fly them better now than I could when I was in training." The major looked at her for another long moment, then at the tactical reports on his desk, then back at her. The mathematics of the situation were simple. They needed pilots, and she was qualified. The question was whether he was willing to take a chance on someone who had been working as a mechanic for over a decade. Outside the office, the sounds of aircraft engines warming up filled the air. Time was running out, and decisions had to be made quickly. Sarah could see Major Thompson weighing the risks and benefits, understanding that unconventional situations sometimes required unconventional solutions. "Have you kept current on F-22 systems and capabilities?" he asked. "Sir, I wrote half the troubleshooting procedures your pilots use when something goes wrong with their aircraft. I know the F-22 better than the people who designed it." Sarah's confidence was quiet but absolute. The major made his decision. Major Thompson stood up from his desk and walked to the window overlooking the flight line. 8 F-22 Raptors sat ready for launch, their engines warming up in the pre-dawn darkness. He could see the pilots doing their final checks, but he knew they were still one aircraft short of what the mission required. The unknown aircraft were now 45 minutes out and closing fast. "Martinez, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until I decide otherwise," the major said, turning back to face Sarah. "The aircraft we're tracking aren't just unidentified. Our intelligence suggests they're carrying advanced weapons systems that could take out our early warning radar network and several key military installations. If they succeed, we'll be blind and vulnerable to a much larger attack." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the true scope of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about intercepting some aircraft that had strayed into restricted airspace. This was potentially the opening move of something much bigger and more dangerous. "Sir, if you're asking whether I can handle combat conditions, the answer is yes. I've run thousands of simulated combat scenarios over the past 12 years. I know the tactics, the weapon systems, and the limitations of both our aircraft and likely enemy capabilities. Major Thompson walked back to his desk and picked up a secure phone. Colonel Stevens, this is Thompson at Nellis. I have a pilot qualification issue I need cleared immediately. He paused, listening to the response. Yes, sir, I understand the urgency. I have a maintenance technician who has current pilot certifications and claims she can fly combat missions in the F-22. Sarah could hear the raised voice on the other end of the phone, though she couldn't make out the exact words. The major held the phone away from his ear slightly and gave Sarah a look that suggested the conversation wasn't going well. Sir, her documentation appears legitimate and we're one pilot short for the mission parameters. Major Thompson continued. I understand the irregularity, but these are irregular circumstances. Another pause. Yes, sir, I'll take full responsibility for the decision. When he hung up the phone, Major Thompson looked at Sarah with an expression that was part determination and part resignation. You've got 15 minutes to prove you can handle that aircraft. If you can demonstrate basic proficiency in systems check and taxi operations, I'll clear you for the mission. If you can't, we go with 5 aircraft and hope for the best. Sarah felt 12 years of waiting and preparation crystallize into this single moment. Everything she had learned, every hour she had spent studying aircraft systems and combat tactics, every civilian flight hour she had logged to maintain her skills, had led to this opportunity. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. The walk from the major's office to the flight line felt simultaneously like the longest and shortest walk of Sarah's life. The other pilots were already in their aircraft, running through pre-flight checks and waiting for final mission authorization. As she approached the 8th F-22, several ground crew members looked at her with confusion. Martinez, what are you doing? Called out Sergeant Peterson, one of the crew chiefs she had worked with for years. This bird is supposed to stay grounded until we get another pilot. Change of plans, Peterson. I'm taking her up. Sarah's voice carried an authority that surprised both herself and the sergeant. The look of shock on Peterson's face was almost comical. He had worked alongside Sarah for 3 years, watching her fix and maintain these aircraft with skill that impressed even the most experienced mechanics. But seeing her climbing into the cockpit wearing a borrowed flight suit was something his brain was struggling to process. Martinez, you're not qualified to fly this thing, Peterson said, genuine concern in his voice. Actually, I am, and right now I'm the only qualified pilot available for this aircraft. Sarah settled into the cockpit with a familiarity that made it clear this wasn't her first time in the pilot's seat of a fighter jet. The moment she strapped in, everything changed. The cockpit felt like home in a way that the maintenance hangar never had. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over as she began the startup sequence. The F-22 systems came online one by one, each indicator light and display showing exactly what she expected to see. Major Thompson's voice came through her headset. Raptor 8, this is Tower. Run through your systems check and report status. Sarah's voice was calm and professional as she responded. Tower, Raptor 8 beginning systems check. Her hands moved across the control panel with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. Engine parameters, flight controls, weapon systems, navigation, communications, radar, electronic warfare suite. Every system checked out perfectly. Hydraulic pressure nominal, engine temperature within parameters, flight control surfaces responding correctly, weapon systems armed and ready, navigation systems aligned, radar functioning normally, electronic countermeasures active, Sarah reported. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. From the ground, Sergeant Peterson watched in amazement as Sarah taxied the F-22 toward the runway with the smooth precision of a seasoned pilot. The aircraft responded to her control inputs like it was an extension of her own body. Other ground crew members had stopped their work to watch, word spreading quickly that the mechanic they had worked alongside for years was about to take off in a fighter jet. In the control tower, Major Thompson watched Sarah's aircraft movements through binoculars. Her taxi speed was perfect, her positioning was precise, and her radio communications were textbook professional. Whatever else might be true about her background, she clearly knew how to handle the F-22. All Raptor flights, this is Tower. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Unknown aircraft are now 32 minutes out and maintaining course toward target areas. Your mission is to intercept and identify these aircraft, and if necessary, prevent them from reaching their objectives by any means necessary. One by one, the F-22s began their takeoff runs. Sarah watched the other 7 aircraft launch ahead of her, their afterburners lighting up the pre-dawn sky as they climbed rapidly toward their patrol altitude. When her turn came, she advanced the throttles and felt the familiar surge of acceleration that she had missed for 12 years. The F-22 lifted off the runway with the grace of a bird that had been born to fly. As Sarah pulled the gear up and began her climb, she could feel every system in the aircraft working in perfect harmony. The engine response was immediate and smooth. The flight controls were crisp and precise, and the aircraft's stealth systems were functioning exactly as designed. Raptor 8, contact departure control on frequency 257.4, came the instruction from the tower. Roger, tower, Raptor 8 switching to departure control. Sarah's voice was steady, but inside she was experiencing a rush of emotions that she had kept buried for over a decade. She was finally back where she belonged, in the cockpit of a fighter jet, ready to do the job she had been trained for all those years ago. As she climbed to join the formation, Sarah looked out at the other F-22s positioning themselves for the intercept mission. In a few minutes, they would be facing an unknown enemy with capabilities that could match their own. The skills she had maintained in secret for 12 years were about to be tested in the most serious way possible. At 35,000 feet, Sarah joined the formation of F-22 Raptors as they streaked across the desert sky toward the intercept point. The sun was just beginning to rise on the horizon, painting the clouds below them in shades of gold and pink. But there was no time to appreciate the beauty of the morning. The radar screen showed 8 unidentified aircraft approaching fast, their electronic signatures unlike anything in the known aircraft database. Raptor lead, this is Raptor 8 requesting position in the formation, Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Raptor 8, take position on our right flank. Maintain spacing and prepare for contact in 12 minutes, replied Captain Morrison, the flight leader. His voice carried a note of skepticism that Sarah recognized from her training days. The other pilots didn't know who she was or what she was capable of, and in combat situations, trust had to be earned quickly. Sarah maneuvered her F-22 into position with smooth precision, using just enough thrust to match the formation's speed while maintaining proper spacing. The aircraft responded to her control inputs like a well-tuned instrument, and she found herself marveling at how much the technology had improved since her training days 12 years ago. Through her headset, Sarah could hear the tactical communications between the other pilots and ground control. The unidentified aircraft were maintaining a tight formation and had not responded to any attempts at radio contact. Their approach vector would take them directly over 3 critical military installations, including a missile defense facility and a strategic command center. All Raptor flights, be advised that the unknown aircraft are showing advanced stealth characteristics, came the warning from the airborne early warning aircraft coordinating the mission. You may not get a clear radar lock until you're within visual range. Sarah checked her weapon systems one more time. The F-22 was loaded with a mix of air-to-air missiles designed to handle both long-range and close-range combat scenarios. Her radar was functioning perfectly, and her electronic warfare systems were ready to counter any attempts by enemy aircraft to jam or deceive her sensors. As they approached the intercept point, Captain Morrison's voice came through the radio with new instructions. All Raptor flights were going to execute a pincer movement. Raptors 1 through 4 will approach from the north. Raptors 5 through 7 will come from the south. Raptor 8, you'll maintain high cover and provide support as needed. Sarah understood the tactical reasoning behind the assignment. As the unknown quantity in the formation, she was being given a position where she could observe and react rather than being relied upon for a critical part of the initial engagement. It was smart leadership, but it also meant she would have to prove herself under fire if the situation escalated. Roger. Raptor lead, Raptor 8 climbing to high cover position, Sarah responded, pulling her aircraft into a steep climb to gain altitude advantage over the engagement area. From her elevated position, Sarah had an excellent view of the tactical situation developing below. Her radar screen showed the 8 unidentified aircraft maintaining their course, despite the obvious presence of intercepting fighters. These weren't aircraft that had accidentally strayed into restricted airspace. They were on a mission and they weren't being deterred by the appearance of American fighters. Contact, 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 came Captain Morrison's voice. I have visual on the unknown aircraft. They appear to be advanced fighter jets of unknown configuration. Stealth characteristics confirmed. No response to radio challenges. Sarah looked down at the engagement area and could see the aircraft formations converging. The unknown fighters were maintaining their course and speed, showing no indication that they were aware of or concerned about the F-22s, moving to intercept them. Suddenly, her radar warning receiver lit up like a Christmas tree. The unknown aircraft had activated their targeting systems and were painting multiple F-22s with radar energy. This was no longer a simple intercept mission. The enemy aircraft were preparing to engage. Raptor lead, this is Raptor 8. I'm showing multiple targeting radars active from the unknown aircraft. They're locked onto our formation, Sarah transmitted, her training taking over as she analyzed the threat displays. Roger, Raptor 8. All flights, weapons free. I repeat, weapons free. Engage targets of opportunity. The peaceful morning sky suddenly erupted into the controlled chaos of aerial combat. Missiles began flying in both directions as the F-22s and the unknown aircraft engaged each other at beyond visual range. Sarah watched from her high position as two of the enemy aircraft broke formation and began evasive maneuvers, while the others continued on their original heading toward the military installations. Raptor 3 is hit. Raptor 3 is hit, came the urgent call over the radio. I'm losing hydraulic pressure and my engines are running rough. I need to return to base immediately. Sarah looked down and could see one of the F-22s leaving the engagement area with visible damage, smoke trailing from its engines. The enemy aircraft were not only advanced, they were effective. The American pilots were skilled and well-trained, but they were facing opponents who seemed to know exactly how to counter their tactics. Raptor 8, this is Raptor lead. We need you down here. Take the high-speed intercept course and engage the aircraft continuing toward the military installations. This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for, consciously and unconsciously for 12 years. She pushed the throttles forward and felt the F-22's engines respond with a surge of power that pressed her back into her seat. The aircraft accelerated rapidly as she dove toward the engagement area, her targeting systems automatically acquiring the enemy aircraft that were still heading toward their objectives. As she closed the distance, Sarah could see that these weren't ordinary fighter jets. Their design was unlike anything she had studied in her years of aircraft analysis. They were clearly built for stealth and high performance, with engine configurations and airframe shapes that suggested technology equal to, or possibly superior to, American capabilities. Raptor 8 has tone. Raptor 8 has tone, Sarah transmitted, indicating that her targeting system had achieved a lock on one of the enemy aircraft. Engaging with AMRAAM. She squeezed the trigger and felt the slight vibration as the advanced medium-range air-to-air missile separated from her aircraft and accelerated toward its target. The missile's rocket motor lit up the sky as it streaked toward the enemy fighter at several times the speed of sound, but the enemy pilot was skilled and well-trained. Sarah watched as the aircraft began a series of evasive maneuvers that were both violent and precisely executed. Chaff and flares filled the air as the enemy pilot attempted to decoy the incoming missile. For a moment, it looked like the countermeasures might work. Then the missile found its target. The explosion was visible even from several miles away, and Sarah's radar screen showed one less enemy aircraft than it had moments before. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining enemy fighters were still heading toward their targets, and they were now aware that she was a serious threat. What happened next would test every skill Sarah had developed over her years of hidden preparation, and would determine whether her decision to reveal her secret capabilities had been justified or catastrophic. The moment Sarah's missile found its target, the tactical situation changed dramatically. The remaining enemy aircraft abandoned their steady approach toward the military installations and immediately began aggressive combat maneuvers. These pilots had been trained for this scenario, and they were ready to fight their way to their objectives. Two of the unknown fighters broke off and turned directly toward Sarah's position, their radar systems actively tracking her F-22. Her threat warning system was screaming alerts as multiple missiles were fired in her direction. Sarah found herself in the situation every fighter pilot trains for but hopes never to experience. Multiple enemy aircraft with advanced weapons trying to kill her. Raptor 8 is defensive. Multiple missiles inbound, Sarah transmitted while throwing her aircraft into a violent evasive maneuver that would have impressed her old Top Gun instructors. The F-22 responded instantly to her control inputs. pulling G-forces that pressed her down into her seat and made her vision narrow around the edges. Sarah's years of studying aircraft performance and limitations were paying off now. She knew exactly how much stress the F-22 could handle, and she pushed it to those limits without hesitation. She rolled the aircraft inverted and pulled it through a diving turn that brought her engines to the edge of stall conditions, but kept her just ahead of the incoming missiles. Chaff and flares burst from her aircraft as she activated the countermeasures systems, creating a cloud of metallic strips and heat sources designed to confuse the guidance systems of enemy missiles. Through her helmet-mounted display, Sarah could see the missiles adjusting their course as they tried to track her through the electronic deception. One missile lost lock and flew harmlessly past her position, exploding several seconds later when its fuel ran out. But the second missile was more sophisticated and maintained its track despite her countermeasures. Sarah had seconds to react before it would detonate close, enough to damage or destroy her aircraft. She pulled the F-22 into a climbing spiral that used every bit of the aircraft's thrust-to-weight advantage. The missile followed, but it was running out of energy as it tried to match her vertical climb rate. At the last possible moment, Sarah rolled out of the climb and dove back toward the Earth, leaving the missile to explode harmlessly above her. "Good kill, Raptor 8, came Captain Morrison's voice. "But we've got bigger problems. The remaining enemy aircraft are splitting up and heading for multiple targets. We can't cover them all." Sarah looked at her tactical display and saw the problem immediately. The enemy had used their initial attack as a diversion. While the American fighters were engaged in aerial combat, other enemy aircraft had slipped past the intercept zone and were now approaching their targets from different directions. Raptor lead. "This is Raptor 8. I can see their strategy. They're using coordinated timing to overwhelm our response capability. We need to prioritize the highest value targets and accept that some enemy aircraft might reach secondary objectives." There was a brief pause before Captain Morrison responded. "Raptor 8, you seem to have a good tactical picture. What do you recommend?" Sarah's mind was working at lightning speed, processing the information from her sensors and combining it with her knowledge of military installations and strategic priorities. The missile defense facility is their primary target. If they take that out, we lose our ability to defend against ballistic missile attacks. I recommend all available aircraft converge on that location. Roger, Raptor 8. All flights converge on the missile defense facility. Maximum speed. Sarah pushed her throttles to full military power and felt the F-22 accelerate toward the critical installation. Through her canopy, she could see other American fighters converging on the same location. But she could also see enemy aircraft approaching from the opposite direction. This was going to be a race against time. As they approached the facility, Sarah's radar detected 3 enemy aircraft in formation, flying at low altitude to avoid detection by ground-based radar systems. They were less than 2 minutes away from being in position to launch their weapons at the installation. Raptor 8 has contact with 3 enemy aircraft approaching the missile facility from the southeast. I'm engaging immediately, Sarah transmitted. Raptor 8, wait for backup. Don't engage 3-to-1 odds by yourself, Captain Morrison warned. But Sarah had already run the mathematics of the situation. The other American fighters were still several minutes away, and the enemy aircraft would reach their launch position before backup could arrive. If she waited for help, the mission would fail. Raptor lead, there's no time. I'm going in. Sarah dove toward the enemy formation, using her altitude advantage to gain speed and positioning. The 3 enemy fighters were flying in a tight formation that would make them mutually supporting in combat, but it also made them predictable. Sarah had studied this type of tactical formation for years, and she knew its weaknesses. She fired 2 missiles simultaneously at the lead aircraft while positioning herself to force the other 2 fighters to split their formation. The enemy pilots reacted exactly as she had predicted, with one turning left and the other turning right to avoid both her missiles and the possibility of a collision with their wingman. The lead aircraft's pilot tried to evade Sarah's missiles, but the geometry of the engagement left him with limited options. One missile missed, but the second found its target. Sarah watched as the enemy fighter disappeared in a ball of flame and debris. Now she was facing 2 enemy fighters in a turning fight at low altitude. This was exactly the kind of scenario that had gotten her in trouble during her Top Gun training 12 years ago. But now she had the experience and knowledge to handle it properly. The enemy pilots were skilled and aggressive, but Sarah had advantages they didn't know about. She knew the exact performance envelope of her F-22. She had studied the flight characteristics of aircraft similar to what they were flying, and she had 12 years of accumulated tactical knowledge to draw upon. Sarah used her aircraft's superior thrust-to-weight ratio to gain an energy advantage over her opponents. She climbed rapidly while they were forced to turn and burn fuel trying to keep up with her. When she had gained sufficient altitude, she rolled over and dove back into the fight with a significant speed advantage. The first enemy pilot never saw her coming. Sarah's cannon fire found its target before the enemy aircraft could react. The second pilot was more alert and managed to evade her initial attack, setting up a classic one-on-one dogfight at low altitude. For the next few minutes, Sarah and the enemy pilot engaged in a deadly dance of aerial combat that pushed both aircraft and pilots to their absolute limits. The enemy fighter was fast and maneuverable, but Sarah had something her opponent didn't expect: intimate knowledge of every system in her own aircraft and years of experience maintaining fighters that had been pushed beyond their design limits. The enemy pilot was trying to force Sarah into a low-speed, turning fight where superior pilot skill would be the deciding factor. But Sarah wasn't going to play by those rules. Instead, she used her aircraft's stealth characteristics and advanced sensors to break visual contact and reposition for an attack from an unexpected angle. When she reappeared, it was behind and above the enemy fighter, in perfect position for a gun's attack. Her cannon fire was precise and deadly, and the enemy aircraft disintegrated under the impact of 20mm rounds designed to destroy armored targets. Raptor 8. Splash 3 enemy aircraft, Sarah transmitted, breathing heavily from the physical stress of high-G combat maneuvering. The missile facility is secure. Outstanding work, Raptor 8, came Captain Morrison's voice. How did you learn to fly like that? Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. 12 years of practice, sir. As she climbed back to a safe altitude, Sarah could see other American fighters engaging the remaining enemy aircraft across the battlefield. The coordinated attack was falling apart as individual enemy pilots found themselves outnumbered and outfought. The American response had been successful, but it had been a close thing. All Raptor flights, this is control. Enemy aircraft are withdrawing from the area. Maintain combat air patrol and be ready for follow-up attacks. Sarah settled into a patrol pattern around the missile defense facility, her eyes constantly scanning the sky for new threats. Her aircraft had performed flawlessly. Her weapon systems had functioned exactly as designed, and her skills had proven equal to the challenge. After 12 years of hiding her abilities, she had finally been able to show what she was truly capable of. But as the immediate adrenaline of combat began to fade, Sarah started thinking about what would happen next. She had revealed her secret under emergency conditions, and there would inevitably be questions about why she had kept her pilot qualifications hidden for so long. The military bureaucracy that had once pushed her out of pilot training would want explanations, investigations, and accountability. As she flew her patrol pattern, Sarah realized that this mission was both an ending and a beginning. Her years as a hidden pilot were over, but her future in the cockpit was just starting to unfold in ways she couldn't yet predict. 3 hours later, Sarah taxied her F-22 back to the flight line at Nellis Air Force Base. The sun was now high in the sky, and what had started as an emergency scramble in the pre-dawn darkness was ending with her aircraft intact and the mission accomplished. But as she shut down the engines and began her post-flight checks, Sarah knew that the real challenges were just beginning. The ground crew that surrounded her aircraft included many of the same mechanics she had worked alongside for years. Sergeant Peterson was there, still looking like he couldn't quite believe what he had witnessed. Other maintenance personnel were examining her F-22 for battle damage, their faces showing a mixture of professional interest and personal amazement. Martinez, that was some impressive flying out there, Peterson said as Sarah climbed down from the cockpit. Radio chatter says you took out 3 enemy fighters by yourself. Just doing the job that needed to be done, Sarah replied. But she could see that her relationship with these people had changed permanently. She was no longer just the mechanic who knew more about aircraft systems than anyone else. Now she was the pilot who had hidden her abilities for over a decade, and then emerged to help save a critical mission. Major Thompson was waiting for her as she completed her post-flight inspection. His expression was difficult to read, combining relief that the mission had been successful with concern about the irregularities of the situation. Behind him stood Colonel Stevens, the base commander, along with several other senior officers whose presence indicated this was about to become an official matter. Staff Sergeant Martinez, you need to come with us for a debriefing, Major Thompson said. His tone was professional but not unfriendly. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered about today's events. Sarah nodded, having expected this moment since she first climbed into the F-22's cockpit. Yes, sir. I understand. The debriefing room was filled with more senior officers than Sarah had seen in one place since her original Top Gun training. Colonel Stevens took the lead, with Major Thompson and several intelligence officers asking detailed questions about every aspect of the morning's combat action. Let's start with the obvious question. Staff Sergeant Martinez, Colonel Stevens began. Why have you been working as an aircraft mechanic for 12 years when you're clearly qualified to be flying combat missions? Sarah took a deep breath and began telling the full story of her Top Gun training, the hydraulic failure incident, and the political aftermath that had led to her withdrawal from pilot training. She explained how she had chosen to transfer to maintenance rather than leave the Air Force entirely, and how she had maintained her flight proficiency through civilian programs while building unparalleled expertise in aircraft systems. The officers listened, without interruption as Sarah described. 12 years of waiting for an opportunity to prove that the decision to wash her out of pilot training had been wrong. She talked about the hundreds of aircraft she had repaired, the systems she had improved, and the knowledge she had gained about fighter operations from a perspective that no other pilot possessed. The investigation report from your training incident indicates pilot error, one of the intelligence officers noted. Are you claiming that report was inaccurate? Sir, I'm saying that the report was incomplete and possibly influenced by factors that had nothing to do with what actually happened in that aircraft, Sarah replied carefully. I saved both myself and a $30 million fighter jet through skill and determination. The fact that I was blamed for the hydraulic failure that caused the emergency says more about the politics of the situation than it does about my flying ability. Colonel Stevens leaned forward in his chair. Staff Sergeant Martinez, your performance today was exceptional by any standard. You demonstrated tactical awareness, flying skill, and combat effectiveness that would be impressive in a pilot with years of active fighter experience. The question is what we do with this information now. Sarah remained silent, understanding that this was a decision that would be made by people far above her pay grade. She had revealed her secret and proven her capabilities, but the military bureaucracy that had once pushed her aside was still in place. The Air Force has invested 12 years in your training as an aircraft maintenance specialist, Colonel Stevens continued. You're one of the most knowledgeable mechanics we have, and your expertise has contributed to the success of numerous missions and the safety of many pilots. At the same time, today's action has demonstrated that you have pilot skills that could be valuable in other roles. Major Thompson spoke up. Sir, if I may, Staff Sergeant Martinez represents a unique asset. Her combination of mechanical knowledge and pilot ability is something we've never had before. She understands these aircraft from the inside out in a way that could revolutionize how we approach both maintenance and operations. The discussion continued for another hour, covering everything from Sarah's security clearance to her potential role in future operations. She answered every question honestly and completely, knowing that any attempt to hide or minimize information at this point would be counterproductive. Finally, Colonel Stevens made his decision. Staff Sergeant Martinez, effective immediately, you're being transferred to a special projects unit that will utilize both your mechanical expertise and your pilot qualifications. You'll be working on advanced aircraft development and testing programs that require someone with your unique combination of skills. Sarah felt a surge of emotions she had kept buried for 12 years. Relief, vindication, excitement, and anticipation, all mixed together as she realized that her long wait was finally over. You'll also be promoted to technical sergeant and will begin refresher training on current fighter, aircraft systems and tactics, the colonel added. Your civilian flight hours are impressive, but you'll need to be certified on current military procedures and equipment. As the debriefing concluded and the senior officers filed out of the room, Major Thompson remained behind to speak with Sarah privately. Martinez, I want you to know that I have enormous respect for what you did today, and for the way you've handled yourself over the years, he said. Not many people would have had the patience and dedication to maintain their skills for 12 years while waiting for the right opportunity. Sarah smiled for the first time since the Morning's emergency began. Sir, I never stopped believing that someday I'd get another chance to prove I belonged in a cockpit. Today just happened to be that day. 6 months later, Sarah was leading test flights of experimental aircraft systems, using her unique perspective to identify problems and solutions that other pilots missed. Her years of hidden preparation had not only vindicated her original abilities but had given her insights that made her invaluable to advanced development programs. The mechanics who had worked with her still found it hard to believe that quiet, knowledgeable Martinez had become one of the most skilled test pilots in the Air Force. But Sarah knew that every hour she had spent learning aircraft systems, every civilian flight she had logged, and every day she had waited for her opportunity had prepared her for exactly the role she was now filling. Her Top Gun skills had been hidden for 12 years, but they had never disappeared. When the moment came to step into the F-22 cockpit, she was ready not just because of what she had learned in the past, but because of what she had never stopped preparing for in the future.